It's great to see so many faculty here. Normally, town hall meetings are wide open to everyone, and we typically get a disproportionate number of staff. This one is so focused on faculty that we really wanted to try to limit it to faculty and encourage faculty participation. So I'm very happy to see all the faces here. We are in a place where we typically don't do the town halls. Normally we're in the university gallery, but with the calendar change and classes now more and more activity on Fridays, we couldn't schedule, in fact, the university gallery. So things are a little more tighter on some of these days. Anyway, thanks for walking over here, and it was a beautiful day. I hope you enjoyed it. And it should still be beautiful for the walk home, walk back. I am very happy to make this presentation. We have been making this presentation to various groups since July in order to provoke a dialogue and discussion over what we now understand is some very rich and informative data that we gathered from the surveys that we asked you to fill out last year. And in particular, this one is geared for faculty, so it is particularly relevant to the coach survey, the Harvard survey that we asked faculty to fill out in the early fall of 2012, right? So we'll talk about this, and we'll also have lots of opportunity to have a conversation. The data is rich, as I said, and we've tried to present the data so that it really focuses in on the issues and the various different subpopulations around that. So it doesn't have a lot of extraneous information, and we can really just zero in on the data. But it's still complex, and I do encourage questions along the way. So don't wait until the end. And there's still, I think, lots of coffee and some pastries back there. Feel free to get up and go back, replenish, and so forth. Okay, so let's get started. What's this all about? Well, first and foremost, this is about you all. And from the president's perspective and my perspective, faculty and staff are really the most important resource that we have to deliver our mission, our educational mission, of course, but our mission in general. So we really want to make sure that we are in touch with where you are, what some of the challenges are that you're facing, and try to address those. We've gone through significant change in the last 10, the last 20, last 10, last 5 years. Significant change. And in the last 3, that has accelerated considerably, right, with the calendar conversion. And the workload that has been thrust upon you as a result of that is substantial. So we're really particularly interested in knowing how those changes have impacted you and what we can do to help. Because we really want to make sure that this is a better place to work, a great place to work. So we've invested a lot to gather that input from you. We've done 3 surveys. In April and May of 2012, we did what was called the Climate and Engagement Surveys. And those went not just to faculty, but to all staff and faculty across the campus. The Climate and the Engagement Survey was administered by another third party through HR, and they combined those 2 kinds of surveys. Climate, measuring our satisfaction around our progress towards inclusive excellence, and engagement, more generally speaking, about satisfaction of working at RIT. And we will share some of that data in this presentation because it nicely triangulates against what the coach survey is telling us. And I think it's important to see how there's some consistency between all three surveys. In a very short while, either today or early next week, the President will be sending a short little message out to campus with a link where the presentation on the climate and engagement surveys will be posted, so you can take a look at that and look at the data. In general, those surveys indicate a nice improvement on our results from 2009. And so that's a nice thing to see. So we've really made good progress in that regard. You will also see that in many of the categories, we're now at the national norm in terms of satisfaction and the climate perceptions. So there's some good progress. There's still some challenges, though, and the presentation does a good job at capturing what those challenges are. So when that comes out, I do encourage you to take a look at that presentation as well. So what we discovered from these three surveys are, again, a rich amount of data, and we certainly discovered that we are doing some things that are tremendous. We're doing some things that look encouraging, and I'm going to point some of those out. There's some things that don't look encouraging, and we want to get more information about what they're saying to us. And then finally, there's clearly some areas of concern that we want to address, and we want starting with this academic year. And I'm very excited that we've engaged not only senior leadership, the deans, but we've also engaged Academic Senate. Michael Labor's there. And he and I are really kind of going to work in partnership so that the Academic Senate is engaged. And before I forget, Michael did ask me to say that one of the important venues that we want to build up in all this process is the connection between faculty and their senators. So it is important that if you have ideas or concerns or other comments and you don't feel like sending them to me, which I also am open to, then use your senators. And Michael is committed to bringing forward those comments to the Academic Senate for discussion appropriately. So it's a great partnership. So we discovered a lot, and all of this is done in order to make this institution a better place to work, a more enjoyable place to work, a more satisfying and rewarding place to work. So what are we going to do? Well, we're in the process of sharing data. This is really the last university-wide presentation that I will be making for the coach data with the university-wide information. But very shortly, the deans will start presenting their college-specific data in college-wide meetings. And that will be important. That's going to occur the rest of this semester. And then we're going to take steps in intersession and in spring semester to start identifying plans of attack against those areas of concern so that we actually begin implementing change and improving what we think will make a difference in those areas of concern very shortly after that. But we do also want to make sure that we take time to celebrate the areas of strength. And you'll see some of those in just a minute. So the department heads and chairs have been engaged in this, and of course they play, you know, I can't underemphasize how important a role they play on campus. At the end of the day, when I talk to trustees or I talk to members of the President's Roundtable, I say the most important person on campus for helping us move forward as an institution really is the department chair. They are that liaison between the faculty and the administration, and they manage in a very challenging way sometimes the expectations of administration and the challenges of workload that the faculty have. So it's those department chairs that play such a critical role. I did want to call them out. I want to call out another group who has been extraordinarily helpful to looking at this coach data and helping us understand what's the best way to share it, and also taking next steps for implementing change. And that is a task force that we put together. Coach really recommended a task force to help in this process. It's led by Dr. Lynn Wild. You all know her. You also probably know Maureen Valentine, who is the Associate Dean in the College of Applied Science and Technology and also a co-PI on the Advance Grant. Lori Clayton is the, Lori, tell me what your title is? Director for Diversity Assessment in the Office of Inclusion of Diversity and Inclusive Excellence. Ellen Rosen from University News. Paul Craig, Department Chair of Chemistry and Material Science. Did I get that right? Margaret Bailey, Professor in Mechanical Engineering and PI of the Advance Grant. Is there another member of the task force that is not here or is here? Pat Scanlon. Many of you know Pat Scanlon. He is the chair and head of the Communications Department in the College of Liberal Arts. And Bob Barbato, thank you, who is a full professor in the College of Business and also area head of marketing and I think strategic management. So all of them have been very helpful in talking to deans, having these conversations in department chairs meeting and so forth. And they will continue to serve a real critical role as we look at this implementation plan this year and in future years as well. And I will occasionally refer to them because they're really the experts on the data and on the specific questions around all that. So as I mentioned, we did start this back in July. We had a retreat with the deans. We always have an annual retreat right before the July Board of Trustees meeting, and we spent a large amount of time talking about this coach data and getting ideas and zeroing in on these areas of concern. And we continue to do that in our Dean's Council meetings on that regard. So a little bit about the coach survey. So currently there are 200 universities and colleges enrolled in the coach survey. The coach survey stands for Collaborative on Academic Careers in Higher Education, and it is run out of the Harvard School of Education. They have really, I think, leaped in a leadership role on trying to assess how faculty are perceiving their positions on campus and measuring their satisfaction. So the nice thing about this is a national survey. We can compare ourselves to other schools. We can see where we are lagging and where we're ahead, and that's the strength of that. Now, there are 200 schools in the coach program, but the survey is asked once every 3 years. So when we talk about the cohort that we're going to compare ourselves to, it's not all 200 schools, but a third of them roughly. So you should think about 70 schools we're comparing ourselves against when we see this data. And the schools do range all the way from a very intensive research school to national liberal arts schools to comprehensive schools to systems and so forth. You're really beginning to see that this is catching on across higher education. It was administered last fall, so it went all the way through, I think, January of 2013. It was open to all full-time, non-administrative faculty, so that's tenure-track faculty, as well as non-tenure track faculty. Now, a little caveat on today's data. Coach originated this survey thinking how to measure satisfaction of just the tenure track faculty. So their expertise has really been in that area. Within the last year or year and a half, they've gone and created the survey and expanded it to non-tenure track faculty. But it's still very new to coach, and they have not sent us the data from non-tenure track faculty here at RIT. So the data doesn't include the feedback that we got from non-tenure track faculty. As soon as we get that data and we put it in an easy-to-read format, we will share that with the campus in the same way. I'm expecting, generally speaking, that a lot of the same kinds of areas of strength and areas of concern are going to overlap with the non-tenure track faculty, but in different ways. And I think we will be looking at how do we dig a little deeper into the differences between those two categories in that regard. Now, there's another feature of the survey which will allow us to identify 5 schools in the coach program that we can use as comparison. And I think what we did before we launched the survey itself, we went through a process of trying to figure out what were the comparison schools that we wanted to use. And I think in retrospect, as I look at the schools up there of the comparison schools, while it is nice to know what those schools are doing, it is really important to understand that these are so much different schools than RIT right now. So for example, Purdue University, Virginia Tech University, these are high intensive research institutions, the top tier of our R1. Purdue does $1 billion in sponsored research, approximately, 800 million. Okay, so I round up. Virginia Tech does $500 million in sponsored research. That's a factor of 10 compared to RIT. So that means that their funding level, their whole orientation is considerably different than what RIT is. Their funding levels, their teaching loads, their labs, and so forth. University of Rochester, another high-intensive research institution. A little less in terms of the total dollars than Virginia Tech, but still very up there. SUNY Binghamton, SUNY Buffalo, their research, they're not high-intensive, they're intensive, so they're one category down, but still ahead of where RIT is. Our Carnegie classification is Master's Comprehensive at the moment. But these two individual schools, again, have substantial research, mission, and sponsored research activity. So all of these schools may be something we might want to move closer to. I say that without rushing to the assumption that that's who we want to be. That's not who we want to be. But as we try to move closer to this model of a teacher scholar, we do want to become a little bit more research oriented in that regard, and so those were the reasons why they were chosen, but I want us to be careful about how we compare ourselves to those. So other data sources, as I've already mentioned, are the engagement and climate survey. Question?
Normally we have like Clarkson, RPI, Carnegie Mellon. In the past we compared ourselves to those schools. Is there a reason why those weren't?
Right. So what David is talking about is the 22 peer school lists that we use for a variety of comparisons, including our salary adjustments that we make. That 22 peer list, first of all, everyone should know which schools are on there. Clarkson is one of them. RPI is definitely another one of them. Actually, Purdue is on that list, and that's one reason why we chose Purdue. So not all of those 22 schools, in fact, I don't even know what portion of those 22 schools were also coach members. So we may not have been able to choose some of those. I will also say that we try to use those schools, but again, they don't always have the same kind of portfolio like RIT does. So RIT's got really strong technology schools, and Clarkson does as well, but Clarkson doesn't have the design and art kind of emphasis that we do so well at as well. So we do try to find the comprehensive schools wherever we can. We do use that peer school a lot whenever we possibly can, and there were some limitations in this one. Okay? All right, the response rate was terrific. In fact, we were, I'd say, in the top 10% of the institutions that took the survey last fall, so 70 institutions, for our response rate. So to all of you that filled out that survey, thank you, because having a high response rate does make the data more robust and more meaningful in that regard. So that's just wonderful. There are also going to be some interesting data that you'll see about subpopulations. So you will see subpopulations in the various different ranks: full professors, associate professors, assistant professors. You won't see the non-tenure track faculty, but they're in that data somewhere that we'll be getting. You'll also see it broken down by gender, male versus female, and you'll also see it broken down white versus faculty of color. So that'll be interesting to look at. Now, the faculty of color doesn't align with our working definitions around Alana, and just have to keep in mind that distinction in that regard. Okay? So this is the results at a glance that Coach provided us, and this was part of the executive summary that I sent out. I'm going to talk us through this so you can see, because I know it's hard to read from this angle. And we're going to dive deeper into this so you'll see higher resolution here. But along the bottom here, let's see if I can get the laser going. Along the bottom, you see approximately 20 different categories. And I'm going to read them off so you can all hear them. You got nature of work research, nature of work service, nature of work teaching, facilities and work resources, personal and family policies, health and retirement benefits, interdisciplinary work, collaboration, mentoring, tenure policies, tenure clarity, tenure reasonableness, promotion, leadership senior, that would be the president and myself. You see leadership divisional, that'll be the deans. You'll see leadership department, department chairs, department collegiality, department engagement, department quality, and then finally appreciation and recognition. So you'll see these 20 or so categories throughout this presentation. So where did these 20 categories come from? Well, Coach asked a bunch of questions to you. And by the way, the survey was a branching survey. So depending on some of your answers, you went into different areas of the survey. What Coach does is aggregate, roll up these questions into these broad categories, and then calculates the average score for all those questions in that category, and that was a score that the institution got for that category. So now let me talk about what you see as the all of 2012, and their scores were, in the case of nature of work research, ranged from a little bit above 2.5 to a little bit above 3.5, out of a scale of 5, because it was a Likert scale. Okay? Now what you see there then is the distribution of the averages of these institutions in this category. The red represents the lower 30% of the institutions and their scores. The green represents the top 30%, and the gray represents the middle 40%. So green is top 30, red is lower 30, gray is middle 40. You also see a line that's the median or the average for that particular score for that particular category. Now you'll see the real important symbol is the diamond. So here's the diamond. That represents RIT. That's our score for that category. Okay? You'll also see, and some are better than others, 5 little circles that are not filled in. So there's a good example of. Those are the 5 selected schools. So that's where they fell on those categories. So, so you can now kind of read how this results at a glance is. And of course, this is at a very high level, and we're going to dive into that. But here's how the discussions have played out so far. What we want to look at are, where do we score nicely and where do we score poorly? And then what are those ones that are kind of in between? So starting with the ones where I think there are areas of strength, we might look at department collegiality. Why? Because that diamond is at least in the gray area. So we're not in the lower 30%. So that's an area that I think is a strength. I think it's something that we should be proud of. That as a department, you're getting along nicely in general with each other. Here's a real strength for us. The family and personal policies, okay? And that's not only HR policies, but it's the policies that we're working on in Academic Senate to make the tenure more family friendly. We'll talk about that a little bit more. The other area of strength clearly is our health and retirement benefits. I think this institution does a very good job at providing robust health and retirement benefits, educational benefits as well to our family members. Okay, so those are things that we should feel good about. Let's not forget that there are some real strengths. Now let's go to the opposite extreme, right? The areas of concern. Well, I could do a little interactive here. I think everyone sees one that is that stands out and smacks you in the face, right? That one right there, promotion. Our diamond is significantly in that lower 30%. So that is clearly an area where we have to dive into and understand what are the issues. Why are faculty so dissatisfied around that? Okay, and we will get into that today, and I want to engage you in a conversation around that in particular. Well, what's another one that the task force and the deans and the department heads really also identified? Well, tenure policies and tenure clarity. And you may say, well, I see the diamond in the red. I understand that, but there's other diamonds in the reds here. When you look at the data in greater detail, you'll see that in particular, our scores in tenure policies and tenure clarity are worse than any of the other ones except for that promotion category here. So there's real issues around tenure policy and tenure clarity. Okay? So if we were just to, say, let's look at the top three and the bottom three, we have one more, and that is around appreciation and recognition. You can kind of see that way down there as well. So what does that mean? We'll have to dive into that. So again, the top three and the bottom three, the strengths and the concerns that we're looking from that at the results at a glance. Strengths, collegiality, family, personal policies, health and retirement benefits. And the concerns, the areas of where we want to make material improvement on promotion clarity. We've added post-tenure mentoring. You'll see that particularly show up. So that's the mentoring of our associate and full professors. Tenure policy clarity, appreciation, and recognition. Okay? Now what I want to do is go back to that results slide and look at some of those other categories that you don't see here, because we want to look at those. So we're going to go back here and now kind of look at those other areas. So we might take a look at collaboration. This is, I call this encouraging to me, right? That we're not in the lower 30%, so we're doing something right at collaborating across boundaries. I think we've got an area of improvement that we can do, no question about it, but let's look for encouraging signs. Here's another one, mentoring. Now, I bet 3 years ago, had we asked the coach survey, mentoring would have not appeared as high on that list. But we made a concerted effort at the university level. The Wallace Center, Lynn Wild, helped really provide a framework. And then each dean worked really hard with the department heads and the faculty to really begin to set up a mentoring system. We're still tweaking and improving it, and there's a current survey out right now to help us gather more information. But I think we've made a very good step forward in that. So I feel very good about where we are in that. That's encouraging to us. And here's another encouraging one that's kind of surprising. Tenure reasonableness. Might have thought that with the lack of clarity on the tenure, that tenure reasonableness might have been in that lower 30%. But in fact, we see it right on average. That's an encouraging sign that at least people perceive the reasonableness of our tenure. Now, these are encouraging. What about ones where I think I'm concerned about? Not as concerned as those lower three that we talked about earlier, but we got to look at these and find out in greater detail. Nature of work teaching. Now again, this is a broad category. It's wrapping up all those questions about teaching under one category. And we have specific sub-details on those. I'm not going to go into great detail right now, but those are available, and I think your deans will be talking about this a lot. But it does talk about teaching loads, and I think that is an underlying current in some of that. So we're scoring in the red there, so that's an area that we have to dive into a little bit more. What's another one? Well, nature of work research. And as I've gone around to going around to all those departments and having great conversations, by the way, thank you for letting me come into you and talk about that. One of the areas is the facilities, the labs that you have to perform your research. And you'll see, again, some of this come out in the data that I present today. Another one where I think we have to dive into, and I want you to keep an eye on that, is facilities and work resources, kind of related to the laboratory issue. And in particular, notice what's interesting is our score is not in the lower 30%, but when we come to one of the last slides I'll show you, where the final question in the survey is, what's the one area that you would recommend as an area of improvement for the university? That's where people got to write in what they thought was important. Facilities and work resources stands out in that. So while it may not stand out here, it does stand out in another question, and we'll look at that in just a minute. Okay? So last one is interdisciplinary work, and this is interesting. So this is a concern, I would say, that we have to explore, that I think faculty don't feel we do enough to encourage or allow even interdisciplinary work. And I think that is something clearly in the future that's going to be increasingly important. So if we don't move this institution to thinking more interdisciplinary, we're going to be really holding ourselves back. So it's an area that we have to explore more on. So there they all are. So in summary, from looking at this middle class, I'd say there's some encouraging signs: collaboration, tenure reasonableness, mentoring. And then we need to dive deeper into nature of work teaching, nature of work research, interdisciplinary work, and our facilities and work resources. Okay? So that's at a very high level, and generally sharing how the data is presented to us and how we might start thinking about diving deeper. So what I want to do now is I want to leave behind the areas of strength and celebrating those, because we can do that, and zero in on the areas of concern and dive deeper into the subpopulations. What are the subpopulations telling us about those three areas of concern, which would be promotion, tenure, clarity, and appreciation and recognition here, okay? Now, before I do that, I forgot this slide though, and that is we're still going to look at those 20 categories, but now you're going to see a little different slide against those subpopulations. So let me explain what's going on here. Now there's another slide after this that has the other, I don't know, there's about another 7 categories here. So you'll see another slide here. But it'll look just like this one. On the top, of course, is our overall mean average score for those categories as an institution. And then you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 different columns here, each representing, well, a population, in some cases a subpopulation. So the first one is overall. So then you have tenured versus pre-tenure. And then you have the ranks, so full, associate, and of course pre-tenure would be the assistant professors. And again, the non-tenure track faculty data is not in this. Then you have by gender, so men and women. And then you have by ethnic, white, and faculty of color. So the overall represents those same places where we are in the top 30, the middle 40, and the lower 30. So, for example, this graph really now shows that nature of work research was in that middle 40%. There's the overall comparison to our cohort group. Okay? Nature of work teaching, on the other hand, is in the red, in the lower 30%. So this is the overall. That's good to keep in mind. Again, we're in the top 30% when we look at personal and family policies. And unilaterally we score really well in that category. It is interesting to just take a step back and look at some of these populations. There will be a discrepancy in male versus female, and of course, this is the reason why we're so fortunate to have the advanced grant, because it really is focused on identifying what are some of the barriers for our women faculty, particularly in STEM. The work that the advanced group does, however, is not just solely in support of the female faculty, it will be in support of all faculty. In fact, it was the advanced grant that really helped a partnership to bring the coach survey here in the first place. So we have a lot to thank for that advanced grant, among other things. It will be also interesting for you to look at the faculty of color. In fact, if you look at the faculty of color, you'll see that their responses are in the middle 40% or the top 30% in that case. So take a look at that as we go through these. Yes?
You also said that in identifying faculty of color, it's not what we call a mono, what is it?
So it includes the Asian population, for example. So it's anything non-white in that category. Does I get that correct? Keith?
What does the gray represent?
So the gray represents that's the middle 40%. Okay? So what it does, it compares faculty of color responses to the faculty of color responses to all the other institutions that are in that cohort group. And in that sense, it falls in that middle 40%. Okay? All right, let's take a look at the remaining categories. There you will see promotion. Again, remember promotion was that really important outlier where we didn't perform well. And it's showing up across every single subpopulation, with the exception of pre-tenure, and there's not applicable. So that's that branching. The pre-tenure faculty didn't answer the question about promotion to full professor in that regard. So fulls answer it, associates answer it, men, women, white, and faculty of color. All scored pretty bad. Leadership senior, I don't know why there's two rows there. There shouldn't be that. It's not like we're trying to emphasize leadership senior in that regard. Trust me, you'll see why in just a minute here. Leadership divisional, again, that's deans. Leadership department, department chairs. By the way, there is big discrepancies among the colleges. Big discrepancies in some categories. Even in promotion, there's differences. Some colleges feel better about promotion than others do. So it's really important to keep in mind this is at the university level. The deans and I are all in agreement that we have to work on this issue. Some deans, though, might not work at it within their college as much as helping out the institution move forward with that. So just keep that in mind. The other one I'll point out is appreciation and recognition. Again, not doing very well in our scores there, so we need to poke at that issue. Okay? All right, now we're really going to dive into those three areas. So I'm going to start with promotion clarity here. Red, all over. Every aspect of the promotion process has some areas of dissatisfaction, or a lot of areas of dissatisfaction. I often think of, when we've pored over this graph over and over and over again, and this is probably a bad sense of humor that I have around that, but I look at that and I'm reminded of when in the Ritter, when we have a hockey game, and the RIT scores a goal against the opposing team, and the corner crew, do you know what they say? Those of you who have been to hockey games, you know what they say. That's kind of how I feel the message is coming across here. I don't mean to make fun of it, though, either, at the same time. Now, the good news is we're really starting to have a lot of good conversations about this. And I hope we get into a little dialogue here, because I think what we have in policy, what Dr. Dessler and I expect around promotion, and what the faculty in the committees do, and what's happening in the hallways are all vastly different. And I think what we're going to go through is a process of calibrating expectations better. And I think that's going to make a big difference. But we also know that there are tangible areas that are evident. And I'm getting that when I go to the departments. Some associate professors have made it very clear that teaching loads are an issue, that they've had to take on more administrative work because they don't have full professors in their departments, for example. The resources that they have to perform their experiments are lagging from what we've provided for the assistant professors. And I will just say that I think this is also a reflection of the focus that the institution has been putting on, that I've been putting on, and the president has been putting on around making sure that our assistant professors have our attention as they go through that probation period, because they have a condition of employment when they come up for tenure review. But it's by no means that it has been our desire to say we're ignoring the associate faculty, but I think that you're telling us that you associate professors feel neglected in all this. And so it is our intention to put a considerable amount of attention on this issue to make sure that we're sending the right message across. So we want to make a material difference in that regard. So that's the promotion clarity. Here's post-tenure mentoring here, and this is an important one to kind of see as well. Like I said, mentoring has been an encouraging sign, and you see that overall benchmark mentoring, the assistant professors put us in the top 30%, and I think that's a reflection of the due diligence that we've had. Notice some populations feel better than others: women over men, faculty of color over white. But where, of course, it's unilaterally red again is that mentoring of associate faculty. So clearly that's going to be one of the low-hanging fruits that we start thinking about immediately, is how can we do a better job at mentoring and helping associate faculty see a path forward to that promotion. And it's interesting that, that we score fairly well on effectiveness of mentoring outside the department. We put in place some university-wide mentoring components. The Wallace Center has done a good job at also connecting people outside the department. Okay, so that's post-tenure mentoring. Tenure policy clarity, another area of concern for us. And again, it's interesting to see how the subpopulations feel about this. So now this is more about the assistant professors. So there you see across all of these subcategories, not across all of them, some were in the middle 40%, but clarity of tenure standards, criteria, process, consistency of messages about tenure. We're scoring low on that regard. Now the good news is the Academic Senate, in particular the Faculty Affairs Committee, has been working very hard all through last year and yesterday, and will continue for the next couple of days, really providing greater clarity on our tenure policy. Get that policy as crisp and as minimal of ambiguity as possible on that. And it's going to take us a while because, you know, the language is important, but it's healthy that this dialogue is happening at Academic Senate where you have a bunch of different eyes looking at this policy. It's going to be a good thing for the institution. And I think also, again, this calibration of expectations is going to be helpful as we move forward in that regard. Any questions over this? Appreciation and recognition here. So again, that's that third area of concern. Overall, scoring in that lower 30%, with the exception of the faculty of color. Another manifestation of my humor here, I take a look at the CAO and I wonder what the Chief Athletic Officer has to do about recognition and appreciation of faculty. I'm kidding, right? It's a Chief Academic Officer. That would be yours truly here on that one. So I have some work to do to figure out what I can do differently to recognize the work that faculty do. So do the deans, but again, it varies from dean to dean. Remember that. Department head, a little less. I mean, we're doing better at the department head level, I think. And then, you know, there's school, college valued by the president and the provost, the department valued by the president and provost, the CAO cares about my faculty rank. Well, you know, that last one probably is a reflection of the associate professor. You know, I don't know, but I think about this, and when we get to our discussion opportunity, you can help me understand that. I'm also asked these questions when I go into those departments. Tell me about, you know, how we can make sure that you're recognized in it. We have done a lot of change on campus. We've made a new college, and that has impacted colleges across the campus. Questions? So I'm now going to invite Lori Clayton up, because what we're going to do is triangulate a little bit between what the coach data tells us about areas of concern and what the climate engagement surveys tells us as well. I think this is interesting to see the correspondence here. So now we need to get her a microphone. And is she going to be recorded on the... She's not going to be recorded unless I give her one of these. Can I give her this one? Is this the one? Oh, I'm getting the thumbs up. Hang on. If you would just put that on your...
All right. All right.
Just like that, and then do you have a pocket or?
I can probably just here.
Yep.
All right.
And you should be good to go.
All right. Can everyone hear me? No?
And then there's a microphone that you're going to use. Right?
Yep, and this will
Oh, okay.
put you on the speakers.
All right. All right. Is that working? All right. Thank you. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Little change here in the program. But I would like to thank Jeremy for really allowing us to talk a little bit about this survey, the climate engagement that took place in April and May, as he mentioned previously in the survey, in the presentation. And I always give a shout out to our HR partners, Judy Bender, Kathleen Martin, who really helped facilitate and support the survey, as well as including the climate dimension. So just a little background about the differences in the surveys, and then we'll go through also and talk about response rates. And again, I'm going to focus on those areas that Jeremy's already spoken about. Tenure and promotion, recognition and appreciation, and facilities and work resources, because we do see some of that data going hand in hand. So I think that's important. We've already talked about the time frame, but let's just talk a little bit about response rates, because there are some similarities here. Looking at our total response rate, again, 55%. This includes both our faculty and our staff at RIT. When you look down at the faculty ranks, we had about 40% of our faculty actually participate, which was very positive. In our tenure track, we had about 327 of the 790 that were in this group, so 41%. And again, for the purposes of today's presentation, we won't talk a bit about the non-tenures. Well, we roll out that the other data from Coach. We'll combine that with our survey. Two questions in particular that I think is important regarding the climate and engagement survey. We had 4 dimensions, and the 5th being climate, but this was particularly around recognition and supervision. So question 16 really speaks and asks both of our faculty and staff around regular feedback. And if you look, now interestingly enough, the 60 to 63% when you disaggregated by faculty rank came in right on par with our overall score, which was about 64% for faculty and staff. So our faculty was right in the mix when I looked across ranks. But when I looked down at question 10 on engagement and climate, one of the things that I thought was important to pull out is when you're speaking around supervisor encouraging career growth, our assistant professors had a 78% favorable response. When I looked at our other ranks, it actually dropped by about 10% and went down to 68%. So we saw a difference by rank. The coach data that I think is important to look at is we had 2 bar charts that coach gave us. And just to give a little bit of background, as Jeremy has with some of these charts and graphs, is when they're referring to you, that's RIT of course, our peers are those 5 schools that Jeremy previously referenced, and all is the total cohort. So we have 2 coach charts. The top chart speaks specifically about have you received formal feedback on your progress towards promotion to full professor. Here, we had over 75% of our faculty indicate no. And again, if we look at the associate professor and the other ranks on our engagement and climate, that question 10, we saw 10% less. So there's a data parallel. We've already talked about some of those areas concerns on the charts that Jeremy's highlighted from coach. Now, if we look at the next area, have you received formal feedback on your progress towards tenure? This is our pre-tenure faculty. Over 75% said yes. So we're seeing differences by rank. And I think the other area to highlight from the coach survey is around that consistent messaging. We saw it come in around 2.75. So while we saw overwhelmingly our faculty have received feedback, that clarity is something that I think we want to focus on. Appreciation and recognition, this goes into the engagement and climate survey first. My supervisor lets me and my colleagues know when they've done a good job. Again, our faculty was 67 to 70%, kind of fell in line. I think we were closer to 70, a little bit over 70, 71% for faculty and staff. Jeremy's spoken to the recognition and appreciation, but just to highlight again, for our total cohort, we're lower. And then when you look at particularly recognition from head or chair, we're lower for the tenured faculty. So I just want to point that out. This is an area that I think corresponds nicely between the 2 surveys. Question 3, we're asking specifically about necessary materials and equipment on the engagement and climate survey. Now, for RIT overall, our faculty and staff, 74% responded favorably. When I looked at faculty by rank is where I saw a marked difference. And particularly lower, that 55% were our associate professors. And that's about 20%, 20 points lower than the overall RIT score. So as Jeremy mentioned, he's had conversations about our laboratory research and studio space, but we definitely are in the lower percent on the coach. So you see a parallel between those 2 surveys and reinforces some of those conversations and discussions. There's 3 other, I think, really key and on a positive note, important data parallels regarding collegiality and coworker performance. You saw Jeremy speak to that as an area of strength from coach, but also was, again, a favorable response on the engagement and climate survey. With the favorable scores, coach, we were 3.88. At the department level, it was even higher. It was over 4.0. On engagement and climate, that over 80% favorable, that's our faculty across ranks. If you're asking where did RIT fall overall with our faculty and staff, we're at 86%. So I think that is, again, a strong connection with the 2 surveys, and I think reinforces that that's an area of strength for us. Our overall job satisfaction, we had 1 question on engagement and climate survey. All in all, are you satisfied with your job? That was a standalone question in that particular survey. We had, I believe, around about in the 70, 74%, something like that overall for RIT. We were lower when I looked at the ranks, particularly for tenured professor and associate. We were about 10% less, 9, 11% less. Now this is compared to the rest of the organization, so that's compared to our faculty and staff. But by rank, our faculty were lower according to overall job satisfaction. Now on coach, the closest question that we have for our faculty is something to the effect of, I would again work at this institution. It's around global satisfaction on the coach. And that really came back strong. We were 3.68 and our total cohort was 3.7. So I do want to reinforce that that was stronger and it was higher on coach versus that overall satisfaction on engagement and climate. I think it's important to look at from our diversity perspective and the lens of our faculty. And regarding, again, we had 17 questions. This was a separate dimension that we added to engagement and made it the Engagement and Climate Survey in 2012. And overall, RIT, in terms of effectiveness in promoting diversity, now this is for our overall campus, faculty and staff, was 75%. Faculty came in around 65%. And a little bit lower for associate professor at around 59%. So it went down a little bit within our faculty ranks. I did though want to look at coach because we asked 2 questions around diversity, and this one is specific to how you feel about colleagues' commitment to promoting diversity within the department, and that came in, again, on a 5-point scale, it came in at 4.0, 4.07. So again, I think a positive reinforcement. So again, looking between the 2 surveys, we saw some of this data come together and really reinforce some of the findings from coach from the previous engagement and climate survey. And now I'm going to give it back to Jeremy to drill down a little bit.
Thank you, Lori.
And I think we'll do the switch, right? Let me give you that.
I got more wires than the National Security Agency on me.
And should be, 1 second, should be all set.
Can you hear me? Okay. I mentioned that there was a final question that Coach asked, and maybe in some sense the most important question. And that question was, tell us the #1 thing your institution can do to improve the workplace for your faculty. Okay? So what you see on this graph are the same 20 categories. Again, the wrap-up, the roll-up of all those questions under those categories. Then you see for each category 4 bars. The black bar is the cohort group, the 70 or so schools that answered that question with the same kind of issues. Okay? And then you see 3 bars to the left of that black bar. The first bar, which is a lighter green color, is the assistant professor response. The next one is the associate professor, and the last one is the full professor. And the Y scale is percentage of those respondents here. Okay, so it really is fair to compare percentages against percentages here. And so you want to look at this through a couple of different lenses. First of all, you might want to look at where we score higher than the black bar. Okay? But you also may want to look at the difference, the delta between where we score and the black bar. Because after all, it may be that all institutions, such as in this one, facilities and resources for work, all institutions struggle with that to some extent. So how do we compare against those? Well, in this particular example, I think it's clear that the faculty are telling us that more faculty feel dissatisfied as a result of facilities and resources for work than our comparable peers do. On the other hand, here's one where we score nicely on, and look at the difference, the delta between the black bar and the other bars at RIT. So again, a very strong response on how people feel about compensation and benefits compared to our peers in that regard. I think where you see the biggest delta are in some of these other ones here, and I'm going to jump over here. So for example, the nature of teaching. Now, in particular, you see associate and assistant professors really express dissatisfaction, if you will, or making that the number one spot compared to the comparable ones and compared to full professors. So we had a good, healthy discussion in Academic Senate when we talked about this. There was some really good poking at it. Why would full professors feel roughly the same as our peers, whereas the associate and assistant professors? And I think some of the dialogue perhaps indicated that it's related to the expectations of scholarship and the teaching loads, for example, so that those people in the assistant and associate ranks feel greater pressure with a lot of workload attached to them, whereas the full professors, because they've promoted to that final rank, don't feel quite that pressure. That's just one hypothesis, something to think about out there. Leadership in general, again, I think it's sort of evenly with our peers. Leadership senior, though, you might say, again, assistants are lower than our peers. The associates, however, and fulls are more dissatisfied with senior leadership than our peers. What else can I point out here? We've talked about teaching. I think that covers the ones that really jump out at me. I think the interesting one is the promotion one, though. So whereas we saw all that red, right, here you don't see it as much. So that's interesting. And again, you only see 2 bars to the left of the black bar, so it's just assistant and associates in that case. Now, it could be that the perception, when people were filling this out, that they said, well, there's not much you can do about promotion from my perspective. I don't know, and that's why it didn't rank as high as we might have seen it in the red. But again, that's something for us to discuss today in that regard. Yeah, question?
So for the other benchmark schools, those are all grouped together and they're not broken out by rank. Is the tenure assistant professor number for RIT, can we tell if that's on par with assistant professors at the other schools?
We cannot compare it, at least not on this. Coach Task Force, what can we say about that? We didn't get how the comparison school scored with the assistant professors. But at the very least, it says if the assistant professors were quite dissatisfied at those other schools, you'd see that, though, in that data, because it would be a percentage scores of their dissatisfactions in that regard. So I think this is clearly an area that we have to poke at more. Okay. All right, let's go to, so I just kind of identify some areas where there's great delta differences here. So tenure, teaching, research, facilities and resources, appreciation and recognition again, and leadership in that case. Okay. Again, lots of variations with the colleges. Keep that in mind in all of these categories. So what's happening next? As I said, our first step is to share the data. So we've been sharing the university-wide data with the various different groups. This is really the last big group that we will share this with. We're recording it, so people who couldn't be here today will have access to this presentation. The presentation is posted online, and so you can take a look at it there. The deans will then be presenting in their colleges over the next couple of months. We kind of hope to finish that up before the end of the calendar year, although some colleges may need January or even February to schedule their college-wide meetings on that. But we are already beginning to have conversations on thinking about how we might move forward with a plan to make changes to those areas of concern, promotion, tenure clarity, and appreciation and recognition. And so here you see the work of our task force thinking about what's the best process. And that differs depending on which area you're talking about. So for example, to really get at promotion clarity and post-tenure mentoring, let's hear from the departments, first of all. So we're really asking the department heads to provide us with some information about what they're doing in that post-tenure mentoring process. And I know some colleges, I see Harvey in the back, has already begun to really think about how they can really provide that coaching and mentoring on a reasonable scale for those associate professors, and finding pathways that they can be promoted on that. The deans and I are heavily engaged in conversations, but we want that information to come from the department heads. The tenure policy clarity, though, is really the purview of the work that's being done in Academic Senate. And I'm so pleased that we've already got a head start on that. The new E5 that is coming through the governance process is going to be transformational in terms of its clarity. There will be a table of contents, whereas before we didn't have that. The sections will be formatted in a clearer way. And the wording is, which is so important, will be carefully framed and phrased so that we reduce ambiguity as much as possible. And I'm very pleased. Plus, new focus on the family care components of extending tenure on that, and that's going to be a game changer for us as well. So I want us to continue to do that process, and then as we calibrate expectations, I think we'll also make headway on that tenure policy clarity. Now, the appreciation recognition, I would love to hear from you, either in this setting or in emails or in when I come to departments, about what is it that we should be doing differently to show appreciation recognition, and how does that take shape? I've been getting some good emails already from faculty in that regard. We did work very hard to start implementing new awards for faculty work in teaching and in research in the colleges. I asked the colleges to do that a couple of years ago. We've implemented new awards for the non-tenure track faculty and the part-time faculty as a way of, again, showing appreciation and recognition. We have added promotion ranks to the non-tenure track faculty, from lecturer to senior lecturer to principal lecturer. We know, though, that we have a lot more work to do in all of those areas, and so that's got to be on the agenda this year as well. So those are the next steps. We're working on those. Your feedback is important to this. And how is this all going to play out for the rest of the year? Again, I'm hopeful that by the end of the calendar year, the colleges will have presented the college-wide data, and we will have made great progress in some of these areas of concern for identifying plans moving forward, and I hope to share that during intersession at some point in time. By the way, Lynn Wild and the Wallace Center are putting together, I think, a very interesting interactive sequence of faculty development workshops called Destination Intersession, and it's scattered throughout that January timeframe. And we're also talking about hosting mixers, tea times. I think that's kind of neat, that we will schedule over in the University Gallery as well to encourage this cross-disciplinary sort of get to know each other ideas out there. So look for more information on that. So the intersession will be an opportunity to share the plans, and then spring semester is to really work on those plans. Hopefully the tenure policy will have been completed by that. And we'll have greater clarity around promotion, expectations, around what we can do to help with resources moving forward. And the low-hanging fruit around mentoring, I think, is going to be another deliverable that we can move on. Summer, semester, and then fall, we're going to be looking at some of those areas that are in that gray block, that mid 40% that we've already identified: the nature of research, the nature of teaching, some interdisciplinary work, if you remember, poking at those. What do we need to do? And we will also be looking at focus groups that are facilitated by a third party to help pull out more narrative from the faculty to get us a deep dive in those areas as well, because sometimes the data doesn't tell the complete story. And that's it. So that's the next step. This is not a one-year process, though. I think we have to keep in mind. And that's why Coach is very deliberate about a 3-year cycle. They give the survey at the beginning of the 3-year cycle, and then They work with the institutions for the next 2 years on improving those lower scores with the expectation that we're going to make a material difference in raising them for the next survey as well. And we're committed to doing the coach survey again and continuing to do that while we really measure the impact of all this change that is happening at the institution on our most vital resources, which is our faculty and staff in that regard. So you all here who made the effort to come and be a part of this town hall meeting have the real opportunity to help create a dialogue that will get recorded out there. And your ideas and thoughts are going to help inform the task force, myself, the deans that are here, think about what we need to work on in the next couple of months. So I'm going to open it up to questions or comments. The floor is wide open here. The topics are wide open in that regard. So let's start here.
I have a question. I know that we've seen aggregate data for the university. Do you have the data divided by college?
I do not have the data by the college, so each dean does. They've been diving into that data. The coach task force is working with each dean, and they will be scheduling meetings with the faculty in the colleges to go over thoroughly that data. Yeah, there.
Let's see. You focused all along on how we compare. There must have been some discussion at some point is, do we ever look at the absolute numbers? You know, you could say that, okay, we're doing well because everybody is lousy in this area, you know, something like that. Was that ever discussed? Or is it always relative to how our peers are doing?
Well, it was always relative to how our peers go. And let me turn to the task force. Is there a sense of that?
Well, you know, we have other evidence too. The survey is one data point. So, for example, we did work with department heads and chairs extensively last year, and we heard from them. So you're gathering data from other sources to validate this as well. So it's not just how we stack up to these other schools, but what is the experience at RIT? So this helps support what we, in a sense, know.
So,
Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
Sort
I'm
of.
just saying, if the norm were at 2.5 and we were right there in the middle, would we be happy with that?
Heck no.
You see what I'm saying? Okay. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but that's my real question.
okay, yeah, and so in that case, I can answer that. No, I think we continually want to show improvement. This is a baseline effort here that we're taking a snapshot of, and clearly our focus is on, well, where do we compare poorly to? Because that's real information that we should be doing a better job at. But do we settle for where we are in all the other categories? No, I think we really want to move the needle forward in all of them as well. The question for the recording, for the audience that might be looking at this, was data that we use relative to the other institutions versus absolute, and really the bottom line was, you know, are we happy even if we're average? And the answer is no. Of course, we want to improve all our scores in that regard. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to let you know that the deaf faculty and staff here at NTID appreciate your efforts at RIT to learn sign language and include the deaf community. We do. At the same time, I am a little disappointed that there was no disaggregated data for deaf individuals. You disaggregated by gender and by faculty of color, but there's nothing about deaf faculty in the findings. And I feel strongly that deaf faculty do address unique issues here, as well as across the campus. And how can NTID use this survey to help the College of NTID improve in areas of concern, specifically for deaf faculty? And if it's not disaggregated, how can we get their perspective? So I'm disappointed.
So the question was, why is there not data specific to the deaf faculty? and how can the input of the deaf faculty help the college NTID make material improvement on its issues. It's a really valid point, and thank you for raising that. Unfortunately, the answer is relatively simple but not satisfactory to you, and that is it's a limitation of the coach survey. Or they're going to correct me on this. Wait a minute.
Yeah, the NSF Advanced Grant, one of our areas of study is faculty who are deaf and hard of hearing. So in the survey, one of the customized questions we asked was for faculty to identify with hearing or hard of hearing or deaf. And we just received back data from Coach last week on their data. So we are studying that. And Sue Foster from within NTID is leading a very vibrant team of researchers and faculty from NTID in better understanding the lived experience of faculty within NTID and having programming around supporting it. So it has been an area of significant interest on the advanced grade, and we were able to extend it by asking that question.
Great.
We had to ask it because it's not data that HR categorizes, so we needed to ask that question.
So I'm so glad I'm getting my return on investment that I put in the task force here. I mean, I'm kidding. They're doing that for free, and I thank that so very much. So thank you. I stand corrected. They did ask for the purposes of the recording, they did ask a specific question regarding our deaf and hard of hearing faculty. The data just arrived, and they're analyzing that. And I'm sure that data will be particularly shared with Jerry Buckley and the administrators in NTID in that regard. The other thing I was going to add is that what about our climate and engagement survey? They also...
No, unfortunately for climate engagement, we did not ask that special question or embed it. So going forward in the next iteration, we'll be sure to add that question.
Great, terrific.
And just also to add, and Charlotte brought this up earlier, we have, at the same time we received the deaf and hard of hearing data, we also received our faculty of color data disaggregated by groups and gender as well. So that came at the same time from Coach, so we'll take a look at that information and be sure to get that out.
So terrific. Lori just shared that in the future, the question that we asked on the coach survey relative to the deaf and hard of hearing will also be asked in the climate engagement survey so that we can, again, triangulate this information for us in that regard. So wonderful. Thank you. Other questions or comments, please?
Well, on the same subject, I would like to say that the percentage of deaf faculty is largest within NTID. However, at the same time, there might be other colleges that are growing the percentages of deaf faculty within an individual college. And so, not just deaf, but people with disabilities might have parallel, unique perspectives.
It's a great point. And yes, I am pleased to see that the colleges themselves outside of NTID are hiring more deaf and hard of hearing faculty, and in some cases faculty with great disabilities. And I think that just adds to our diversity and inclusiveness. So I take your point to make sure that all of the deans have this data that we might have, and moving forward thinking about how we can do a better job at collecting data for that subpopulation of faculty. Great, thank you. What stands out to you from what you saw today and what you've heard about the coach as either areas of success that we should feel good about or areas of concern that you saw today? What stands out? Yeah.
I can speak for no one in this room except myself, right? For me, as associate professor in Golisano, and as somebody who doesn't have a PhD, I'm looking at my future here, and I see no path to promotion. There is nothing.
And this is a very common theme that we are hearing in my conversations with the faculty, and it's what the coach task force have heard, it's what the deans have heard, in particular in Golisano College and in Cass, where we have a large number of faculty that don't have those terminal degrees. So, this is interesting because I think what we're having conversations with is, first of all, we haven't been, I think, deliberate with you at sitting down with you and figuring out what might be some pathways for you. Now, we can't do that until we really have an understanding of what the policy E6, which is on promotion, really says. And I think that one of the core sentences in that policy is in section 2 there, and it says, I'm going to paraphrase it, so don't shoot me right now, but I'm going to paraphrase it, something to the extent that, taken as a whole, what we look for promotion to full professor is excellence. Taken as a whole, meaning across the 3 broad areas of faculty work, teaching, research or scholarship, and service and leadership, taken as a whole, what we're looking for is excellence. Now, in some of these settings, when I've had conversations with heads, when I think we talked about a little bit in Academic Senate, the interpretations of what that sentence meant varied wildly. Did it mean that you had to be excellent in all 3 categories? Does it mean you have to have excellence in research? Because there's often a perception that that's the only path forward. And I can tell you that the deans and I are engaged in a conversation about what does that really mean and how can we calibrate this so that there are pathways for you, and what do we need to put in place? Now, it's not just a pathway. I know that there's also teaching load issues in your college, for example, and there may be resource issues in that regard too. So I think while I hear you loud and clear that you're disappointed, I take that on as a challenge of how we might make sure that we do everything we can to rectify that situation.
To follow up on that, the other, I realize that the yearly, what do we call it? The yearly
Annual evaluation?
The annual evaluation that we get is separate than promotion. But in our college, in the annual promotion, if you are not rated as doing satisfactory, your overall grade gets demoted. And so that again is telling me if I'm not at least good, if I have a year that's below in my scholarship, if I have an off year and I don't publish something, I'm going to get punitive damage across the board for that year. And that put together with the view of what I think right now the tenure process is, I'm screwed. I mean, that's kind of how I'm feeling.
Yep. Understandable. I can completely see how you might feel on that, and I think there are probably others in this room that feel exactly the same way, because I know that they're out there. There's a large group of you in those, particularly in those 2 colleges, but other colleges as well, probably. And I would say to you that these conversations that we're having here, that we're having in the deans and the department chairs, are all about calibrating expectations. So the work that we do there, even if it's around ostensibly promotion, will trickle down to our notions on evaluations. And I know that the advanced grant is particularly interested in making sure that the university does as consistent a job of what we mean by the various different rankings when we do our annual evaluations, because those are, when we're inconsistent, it's when those result in feelings of unfairness, feelings of that there's no opportunities, feelings that you're being demoted or penalized, even though in other areas you're excelling at. So I think between all these different activities that we've got going, whether it's the advanced grant or the dialogue, it is my hope, it is my expectation that we make material progress on that. Question back there.
Survey
Right. Yeah, and I'm sorry, and when I say laboratory, I was in my own mind including studio, the work that they do, because I know that that's an equally important resource to the faculty in the arts. Space is one of the most challenging issues that we have on campus. Actually, salaries are much easier, and money is much easier in a certain sense than space is. I can tell you that the university will be deliberately slowing down on any construction that moves forward. In fact, the only last project that is known is the one that is for the College of Health Science and Technology. That is a deliberate expectation of the trustees that they really do not want to see more new buildings go up on this campus. And I don't view that as a necessary challenge, because I think there's a lot of space opportunities that we have to repurpose to help address our core academic needs. And I also expect that within the next 5 years, we are going to see a significant percentage of our student credit hours be generated in the online space. If we don't, we're going to fall behind, and that's going to put us at a competitive disadvantage. And when we put more student credit hours online, we will be making changes, therefore, to how we use space on this campus. Now, RIT is a very experiential-oriented campus, so I get the fact about making sure that we also have FaceTime, so don't misconstrue what I'm saying here. But nonetheless, I think you're going to see dramatic changes in the next 5 years on how universities deliver their courses and how they use space. And I think there's some opportunities emerging right now on campus because of some of the previous construction that we've done and because of some changes in personnel across campus that we're looking at. But it will remain challenging from a research point of view of how we identify space for that research or creative work in that regard. Question? Yeah, Andre.
One of the concerns was tenure parity or promotion parity. And I think, I guess based on the survey, it seems like it's for faculty that's already here. But I think it affects also faculty recruitment. Because as we interview faculty, the policy might say one thing, but then the reality in terms of like space, startup packages, and so forth and so forth. I think we have to send a consistent message, like, the startup packages need to be commensurate with the expectations. And
Yeah.
a lot of the times those don't sync. And so then you don't get to attract the best faculty for whether it's teaching or research. And I
Right.
think we have to,
Right.
I think we need to focus on that if we want to grow and, reach levels of Purdue or the other research.
Right.
We have to look at the
Right.
message that is on.
So the comment was about that we want to be careful about overly focusing on existing faculty as we continue to want to recruit exceptional, dedicated faculty to come to RIT, and making sure that they have the clarity, they have the resources that are commensurate with the expectations. And I think that's a very valid point. Just keep in mind that the obvious challenges that we have around enrollment and the budget and the costs of bringing on tenure track faculty need to be balanced with an appropriate use of the non-tenure track faculty to help make sure that we still have the capacity to teach our courses, that we do a great job in the classroom as well. So it's going to be a balanced approach in order for us to address that issue in that regard. Right here.
First of all, I wanted to publicly thank you for being so fast to respond. We've emailed several times, and Kevin Williams, and you've always responded quickly, and I'm very appreciative for your transparency and for this talk, so thank you for that. I'm a lecturer, and I have to admit that I'm really dismayed at the fact that our data is disenfranchised and totally uncoupled from the climate data of this presentation. I understand that it's forthcoming, but it will still be uncoupled
Yeah.
from the aggregate data. And
Yep.
so when I hear people say, well, we're getting a sense of the climate, we're really not, because from what I can perceive, RIT is moving to a where we're adding.
More and more.
And that's the hamster on the wheel here. And I think that that's a real issue for looking at the academic future of this university. And then one last comment is, and I'll couple it with one of my colleagues, I think that we need to begin to factor into some of our assessment the fact that we're a bilingual campus, that we actively support American Sign Language and English, and those live in harmony. And hopefully, we recognize that. We're not a disability. This is not a disability college at NTID, that it's a bilingual college. And I don't think that we've moved that up the ranks enough. I don't think that, and when we see these.
To appreciate that.
I don't see, I think that at times we have to deal with some of those issues of integration of language and culture, and they get glossed over as issues of disability, accommodation, and access.
That's a great point. There's two really important points that Kevin made. One was a disappointment that, again, the data for non-tenure track faculty, lecturers in particular, is disaggregated from the data that we saw today. That's a limitation of the coach mechanism right now. As soon as we get that, we will be putting that out there across the campus. That'll be my responsibility. And we'll be having conversations with the deans. Okay, let's really take a look at that data now and say, what do we need to look at? Because you're absolutely right. The future of RIT to a large extent does depend on a very healthy, satisfied, and included group of full-time non-tenure track faculty as well as part-time faculty. And I know that we have areas of weaknesses of how we perceive we're treating you as a subpopulation there, and we have a commitment to make that a better place for you all to work. It will take time, and again, policy change is part of that. The other comment that he made I think is very interesting, and that is that really RIT, and we are blessed by this. This is such a unique situation for an institution of higher learning to have the deaf and hard of hearing population that we have. It really is a bilingual campus. There are two languages really embraced here, of course the English language and American Sign Language. And the notions of not only language but culture of this important population of students and faculty, it presents both opportunities and challenges that we can't gloss over, we can't just assume is put off in the disability area. So I'm glad that you shared that with us, and it's given us some food for thought. I think one more question, and then I'm cognizant of the time. So, yep. Nope.
I just wanted, again, thanks a lot for having this session. I think it's been very good. When I take a look at the data that you had up on there, I really didn't see anything that surprised me. And so I know that there's been some surprise in what the results were, but when I take a look at this, just by my mutterings that I hear, from people in the hall, I can kind of see where people are happy and people are unhappy and so on. And so I didn't really see any surprise, in the data itself. What I'd like to deal with just for a second is this idea of appreciation.
Yeah, please.
And and again, like Dan, I can only speak for myself, really. But I think, I feel really underappreciated. And not that I'm, God's gift to RIT or anything like that, but, we've worked very, very hard in the last couple of years. And let me give you a couple of the comments that I've gotten. In our particular program, we've decided to rewrite the entire program. We use semester conversion as an opportunity to really do it over.
And you're in a minority, so thank you for doing that. Right?
And I know we are, and I think, at the end of this year, by the time we get through maybe the first couple of years, we had a very good program before. We're going to have a significantly better program. The issue that we run into on that is that it takes a lot of time to rewrite all of these courses. And so I have worked I'm starting to get complaints from my wife, I'll just leave it at that.
That's bad. That's a bad thing. We don't want to.
So the main boss is upset. I have worked probably 40 to 50 hours a week all summer. I'm still working tremendous hours because we still have courses that need converting because there just physically was not enough time
Yep.
for that. And that's not a complaint, by the way. I'm not complaining about the workload. Okay,
I understand.
I think this is something that was good for us to do. But let me tell you a couple of things that are going to happen. The first thing is comments that I've gotten from at least 2 administrators. You know, when I say, well, you know, I can't really get to this, particularly if it happens to be a scholarship area or something like that, is, well, you've had 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, I've had 2 years, and about 1 or 1.5 of that year was spent getting the program designed.
Right.
As opposed to the course design. And the other thing that's going to happen to me is that when I get reviewed in December, I'm probably going to get dinged on the scholarship area because I've been spending more time,
Mhm.
you know, working
I see your point.
the teaching area. And I agree, teaching is my responsibility. I'm not concerned, you know, I'm not complaining about the workload. But this whole idea of appreciation, I think, is something that the administration is totally overlooking.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple minutes ago about, you know, awards and things like that. You know, when I was back in industry, I used to be the employee of the month, you know. Those are nice. But what we really needed in order to get this thing done was relief in some areas. And we didn't get it.
Relief in some areas, yeah. Okay.
And so, and I'm not the only one who said that, but
Right.
again, I'm only speaking for myself. And probably for a couple other people. So I think this is an area, when I look up there and I see, you know, appreciation and things like that, and I'm not angry and I'm not, you know, but I'm going to tell you, you know, I am going to, I'm not so much angry as disappointed.
Yeah.
That I think what I will find when I eventually get my review from this year.
Yeah.
And it'll be because, for example, in our college, our policy is if you get a 1 in any area, you know, that's what you're reducing it. Now, maybe I won't get a 1 in scholarship. I mean, I've got a paper, I'm working on a grant and things like that. But if I take a look at, you know, what could potentially happen to my review this year, much of which I feel I have no control over, I think I feel pretty unappreciated.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and again, I'm not really complaining about the work or not complaining about the direction or anything like that. It's just that I think there are times when we need some relief and we just, the administration
Yep.
feels totally unsupportive.
Yep.
of that.
Yep.
So that's just, that.
No, you know what? First of all, I think it took a little courage on your part to put it in that way and to put it in a way where you didn't come across as complaining or whining. You brought up a really valid point. It's clearly an issue in our data. The data is showing that. And without comments like yourself and hopefully others, you know, I won't know what is out there and what's being done necessarily in the colleges, or I won't know what I'm doing in a subliminal way or in an unintentional way about the messaging that I need to change in that regard. I am disappointed to hear anyone who said that you know, your workload right now or the work that you're doing, you could have spent the last 3 years doing. I think the amount of work that the faculty and the staff have done in the last 3 years is astonishing. And when I have given presentations to the trustees or to the President's Roundtable about the complexity of what was accomplished and what needed to be done by the faculty and staff, those people from the outside saying, it is absolutely amazing and incredible that you have been able to do this complex change in a short amount of time with as few bumps along the road that we've had, and to be at a state where, we're in semesters now, and for the most part, things are going pretty damn smoothly. And they said to me and to Dr. Dessler, if you're not recognizing the work of the faculty and staff or your employees in this process, then you're missing an important part of the leadership that has to happen as a result of this change management. So I hear you exactly on what you're saying, and I thank you for sharing that. I think it really does deserve good conversations with the deans and with the department heads around exactly this issue, and we will have meetings with the department heads in the issue, and I think this is on my agenda to nibble at. I have heard this conundrum about your lowest score determines your overall score, and I'll just tell you that I have not had a good conversation with the dean on that topic yet, so I will have a conversation. To me, I think it doesn't get to your point, and we have to get to your point in this conversation. So, okay, yeah, back here and here. No, right here, yeah.
Okay. So I'm a junior faculty member, and going to this sort of sense of expectations, it seems that the tenure stuff is being dealt with on a university level. Something I think we see, certainly, again, I can only speak to my own experience, this will be the theme, in my school, is that I hear a couple things from senior members of the faculty that include, I don't know if I get tenure here now, because the expectations are changing, and this is the way things were done when I was pre-tenure, so we can still do it that way. So this happens, we have no control really over our teaching, our course assignments and things like that, because these are done on committees that we don't run. And it said, oh, well, if you're going to get several new preps a year, that's the way it was 7 or 8 years ago when I started. So it's great to have the university as a whole try to clarify things, but there are still places where that sort of alignment of expectation doesn't happen at a low level that affects us inside our departments.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any way to deal with that.
Well, one of the ways that we have dealt with it, which is substantial, is that we've made dramatic changes to the teaching load for the assistant professors. So we unilaterally brought that load down to, under the quarter system, it was 6 courses a year. It should be down to about no more than 5 courses. In some cases, it's lower than that. Now, that meant that the associate professors and the full professors had to pick up some of the slack in that regard. So there is a change in the operations that the full professors didn't have when they were going through tenure in that case. So I just wanted to point that out. But you bring up a good point that expectations are much higher for assistant professors, and calibrating that workload against those expectations, we continue to have to think about and make progress on in that regard. So it's a good point. I think we should take one more. So Sharon, and then we'll draw it to a close. Yeah.
In these small groups, some people share it today, and like you said, I think that's very brave. I think there are a lot of people that may not feel comfortable sharing stories like that
Right.
in an open forum, and I'm interested to hear more about the plans for focus groups and how that may tie into your plans.
So the question for the recording is, what's the plan around focus groups so that we can pull out some of those individual stories in a safe environment? And I am in conversations with the task force, so we're going to work to draft a plan and figure out how we can implement some of these focus groups. I think our expectation will be that through the next 3 or 4 months that we would roll out not a huge number of focus groups, a limited number of focus groups, but they would be facilitated by a third party so that we really get that flow of information in a safe environment and poke at some of these big areas of concern that we're hearing, but also keeping it wide open so that other comments can flow. Well, we're at the close of our time. I want to thank you for your attention, your time, for your walk over here. I hope the walk back is nice. Please don't take this as the only opportunity to submit your thoughts or ideas. I'm open to email. You know who the task force are. You can share their thoughts with them. Your senators are another good source of bringing issues to the forefront of us. And I hope that you're engaged in the college discussions as they move forward. I have a strong interest and a commitment that we will make material progress on this over the next year and in the future years as well. This has got to be a priority for us if we're going to move to our aspiration to become really a great university, a national university. We've got to make sure that the faculty and staff feel that this is a great place to work. So thank you very much. Have a great day and a great weekend.